So you was at the game. You know, it was at the game of final, right?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I was at the game of final.
Ms. Rivers, can you hear us?
And
Yes, I can, Judge. I'm ready.
Great. Well, let's get started. Mr. King, good afternoon.
good afternoon, Judge.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm okay. Do you need to speak with Mr. Head before we bring him out?
I do.
Okay.
Just very brief.
That's great. If you want to head back there. Ms. Fagan, do you need to speak with Mr. Blige before we bring him out?
No, Your Honor.
Great. When you all bring Mr. King out, you can bring the two defendants out in whatever order you want to bring them out. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Same host. Good afternoon, everyone. Same host. As did for the trial. New motion outcomes, you guys cannot handle whatever sentence the judge we bring will impose your loved ones. Please, we want to kindly ask you to leave the courtroom, okay? All right, so make sure your cell phones are off. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome, Judge.
Are you ready, Judge?
Please, whenever you guys are ready, you can bring Mr. Head and Mr. Blige out.
He was like, "You see that guy with all that bling on?" She said, "Oh my goodness, that's so." Didn't tell her that. I know who you was.
All right, we're going to get on the record in 19 SC 172644. It is for the purposes of today's hearing, the state versus Tyree Blige and Xavier Head. We have Mr. Abate and Mr. Rao here on behalf of the state. Mr. King is here with his client, Mr. Head, and Ms. Fagan is here with her client, Mr. Blige. On November 1, the jury found Mr. Blige guilty of counts 3 through 5 of the indictment. That's aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during commission of a felony, and tampering with evidence. Count 3 carries a range of 1 to 20 years. Count 4 is a 5-year consecutive sentence, consecutive to whatever the longest other sentence might be. And count 5 has a range of 1 to 10 years. On that same day, Mr. Head was found guilty by that same jury of counts 3 and I don't know if it was 4. It's another possession of a firearm during commission of a felony. So it's an aggravated assault, which is 1 to 20 years, followed by a 5-year consecutive sentence. All of these are parolable offenses, probatable offenses, etc. What we're going to do this afternoon is first hear from Mr. Abate or Mr. Rao as to what the state thinks an appropriate sentence is, given all the facts and circumstances of this case, about which we all know much more than would be true were this a plea of guilty. Then if there's anyone from the victim's family who wants to be heard, or are there any victim impact statements that Mr. Abate or Ms. Rolak want to share with me, I will certainly hear those. Once that's complete, then I will turn and we'll do our usual. Ms. Fagan will go first, unless you guys have agreed to switch it up for sentencing. Ms. Fagan, you can share with me anything and everything, and then the same opportunity, family members or supporters of Mr. Blige, and then if Mr. Blige has anything he wants to say. And then Mr. King will do the same thing for you and your client, Mr. Head. And I will listen throughout all that. I may have a few questions, and then after I've heard everything, I'll let you all know what the sentences will be as a result of these 2 verdicts. Any questions? And this is being live streamed now, so if there are family members out there, they can pick it up on the usual YouTube feed. Mr. Abate, any questions or amendments to that setup?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. King?
No, Judge. Thank you.
Ms. Fagan?
No, Your Honor.
All right. When you are ready, Mr. Abate or Mr. Rao.
Thank you, Judge. And good afternoon. On behalf of the state, survived by Mr. Solomon Smith, many members of his family are directly behind the state, including his mom, Ms. Nancy Smith, as well as his sister, Ms. Jessica Smith. Another sister, Ms. Renee Smith, has been here throughout the entire trial and actually in every proceeding. She was unable to be here today, but it's my understanding she is watching on the YouTube. I just wanted the court to be aware of that. At the appropriate time, both Ms. Nancy Smith and Ms. Jessica Smith both last in that statement, Your Honor. There's also many other family members in the room and watching on the YouTube link, and they have requested, along with both Ms. Nancy and Ms. Jessica, there's a short kind of collage of pictures that's in a video form. It's about 7 minutes long. I only intend to play about 3 minutes for Your Honor, with Your Honor's permission, after the state makes its recommendation as it pertains to sentencing. Your Honor, as it pertains to Mr. Tyree Blige, the court did indicate the jury found him guilty of counts 3, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, count 4, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and count 5, tampering with evidence. The state's recommendation to the court 20 years to serve on the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Count 4, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, 5 years to serve consecutive to count 3, and then count 5, tampering with evidence, 10 years to serve consecutive to count 4, for a total of 35 years. The state makes that recommendation based on the evidence that was presented during the trial, which Your Honor presided. It was clear that based on the testimony of Tyree Blige, when he testified before the jury, as well as Your Honor, that he was waiting and observing. And the video makes clear that he waited and observed for several minutes until Mr. Head, his co-defendant, drove his vehicle, parked it pretty much parallel to Mr. Blige, and they both walked down towards the parking lot and opened fire upon it. I said it to the court, and I know you heard all the evidence and saw that video entirely, probably too many times, in Your Honor's opinion. But it was clear from the video that there was no threat at the time that Mr. Blige and Mr. Head decided to open fire on the parking lot, in the middle of the parking lot. The threats that were highlighted during the trial by defense counsel were over. It's clear that no one shot prior to either one of these defendants, just opened fire on the parking lot. In the state's opinion, there would have been no shots fired had the defendants not opened fire on the group of people, which ultimately led to the death of Solomon Smith. The state would contend that the evidence was clear that Mr. Smith was on the ground shot prior to Javonta Rivers firing 3 times, pointed in the upward direction. I understand that the jury there was reasonable doubt as pertaining to who shot the bullet that ended up hitting Mr. Smith in the back, which ultimately caused his death. I highlight to the court that uncertainty is because the defendants concealed evidence after they opened fire on the group of people. They picked up shell casings, they hid firearms. Mr. Blige testified that he actually concealed an alleged 9mm. We still don't have that 9mm here today. There's no evidence that it actually was a 9mm. But he testified to the court that after he committed the shooting, collected all the shell casings, and then left the scene, hid it in a bag in a room somewhere in his mother's house, further concealing evidence that the state contend would have shown that he and Mr. Head were the ultimate cause of Solomon Smith's death on July 12th. Because of all of that, Your Honor, is the reason the state makes the recommendation it does as it pertains to Tyra Blige. As to Xavier Head, as to count 3, the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we would recommend the court sentence Mr. Head to 20 years to serve, followed by 5 years to serve consecutive for count 4, the possession of firearms with an admission of felony, based on all the facts and evidence as it unfolded and came out through the testimony, maybe progressively at times, from the witnesses who testified during the trial. At this time, Your Honor, I could play the video or one of either Miss Jessica or Miss Nitin can make a text statement, whichever Your Honor would prefer to hear or see first.
I will defer to you. You can do that in any order you want. Are you aware of any criminal history for either defendant that would affect the nature of their sentence? I don't hear you saying you're seeking to recidivize either defendant. And I think we heard during trial that neither defendant has an adult criminal history.
That is correct, Your Honor. There is an open case that was recently indicted. It's 21 SC 77772 for Mr. Xavier Head. He is a co-defendant. I believe the co-defendants are Bonte Hinton.
I bumped into that when I sentenced Mr. Hinton.
Yes, and then Mr. Devontae Hill, who is there. He is a co-defendant in a case, another homicide case, to his brother in Judge Lethbridge, which I believe is the reason why it's being transferred, because it was a year older than the case that we most recently tried.
But the situation involving Mr. Head, this new indictment, involves allegations that post-date the shooting at Buck. It's something that happened while he was in jail, as I understand it. So something he needs to work through, maybe evidence that he hasn't been a model inmate, but it's not something that occurred before the Buckhead Loft shooting.
That's very much correct, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. We can go forward in any order you want. So Ms. Smith, Ms. Rolak will tell you right where to stand, and she's going to stand there with you. Need you to come a little closer. Our court reporter is remote, so it actually might help. Oh, why don't you try right there? But if the court reporter can't hear you, I'll need you to come to a microphone. We'll see how it goes. Okay.
Nancy Y, SMITA.
Ms. Smith, do you mind taking your mask off? If you want to keep it on, you can, but you're going to need to go to a microphone because our court reporter can't hear you. Mr. Abate, might she be able to sit and use the microphone there? All right, so Nancy Smith, you're now seated at the prosecution table, and if you'd speak into that microphone, please.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Solomon Smith, mother. And I just want justice for my son. He didn't deserve to die like that. He was trying to help somebody. And watching that video, it was very, very hard for me to see my child on the ground like that. And no longer want to take responsibility for what they did to my child. And if that video hadn't came out, they would have kept on living their life and doing whatever they wanted to do in their life. I have to go to the cemetery every Sunday to visit my son. That's my life. His toothbrush is still in the bathroom, his clothes, everything is still the same because that was my child. And it hurts. And everybody want their children to be right and to do right. Don't nobody want their child to die or to go to jail, but everybody have a choice to make the right decision or the wrong decision in life. God gives you that right to do the right thing or the wrong thing. But they took something from me. But I forgive them because I have to. But I can't give them nothing else because they've taken my son away from me. I give them no thought, but I prayed for them. But I need and I want justice for my son. That's all I want. And it hurts. I hurt every day because I don't see that smile or that laughter or us dancing together or him going to the autism walk with his nieces and his brother. None of that. All of that is gone. I wish somebody could give my son 20 years or 5 years or 10 years and go out there into the cemetery and tell him to come on. You could come home. It's okay. But I don't have that. They can go to the jail and visit their loved one. I have to go to the cemetery. And it just ain't right. And I don't see no remorse or anything from anybody. I watched that young man on that stand and I didn't see anything, no kind of remorse or sympathy or anything. And it hurts that the world is like that and people are like that. And it don't make sense, but it hurts. And I want justice for my son. Thank you, Honor, for listening. Thank you so much.
Ms. Smith, I'm honored to be able to listen, and I appreciate you sharing that. Did your son live with you?
Yes, sometime he came home, the last time I really saw him was 4th of July when I had a cookout, and he came and we danced to Sam Cooke. And I had a video of the cha-cha-cha. We had a great time. And that was the last time that I enjoyed my child. Okay. And he was going to school to be an electrician. He didn't have no record. He wasn't a bad child. He was a good child, but we all have our faults. He don't have blood on his hand, and I thank God for that. I thank the Lord for that. But he was a good boy, and he had people who loved him and who misses him very, very much. But thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Let me see.
My name is Jessica Smith, Jessica Smith. So before the court knew him as Mr. Smith, the deceased, or Solo, he was simply Solomon to us, loud, funny, and loving, but most of all, aggravating to most. He and I were the closest. I am number 4, he is number 5. July 12, 2019, as I was on my way to the hospital, I begged God not to call for him, because only God knew how much I loved him. But instead, I left the hospital without my baby brother. And a broken heart. If you knew how close he and I were, you'd understand that I lost the light of my life. No more laughs, hugs, celebrations, pictures, dancing, and most of all, no more I love yous. On July 20th, I said my final see you laters with a poem called Memories of You, Brother. It's been the hardest thing to lose you. You meant so much to me. But you are in my heart, baby brother, and that's where you'll always be. I know that heaven called you home, but I wish you could have stayed. At least the memories I have of you, they'll never fade. I did not want to lose you, but you did not go alone, because a part of me went with you when heaven called you home. So just remember one thing, we are not apart. You're with me in my memories and forever in my broken heart. Losing Solomon has been tough on us as a family. I always say to myself, who knew that the baby was the glue? Our boy is gone forever. And we're here to pick up the little pieces that we have left. I miss and love him so much, and I hope that I could get better. But I am sick without him, mentally and emotionally drained. I need him like I need air to breathe. How do I survive without my air? How do I put my pieces together when half of me is missing? We can't pack out the courtroom, but understand that he's truly loved and missed. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
And Judge, at this time, the state's going to play the memorial video on behalf of all of Solomon Smith's family. We'll play it's about 3 minutes and 7 seconds. See if I can get the share screen right today.
Oh, I know why. I gotta click the box.
My strength and my pride, only God may know why. Still I will get high. Who would know that you had to go so suddenly, so fast? How could it be? Not a sweet memory would be all that we have made. Now that you're gone, baby, I go on. The lights just I'm so empty inside, in my tears I can't hide. But I'll try to face the pain. Though I'm missing you, although I find a way to get through. I'll find a way, living without you. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God may know why. Still I will get by. There were so many things that we could have shared. If time was on our side. Now that you're gone, every day I go on, but I smile with every tear I cry. Though I'm missing you, although I'm missing you, I find a way to get through. I'll find a way, living without you. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God makes me right. Still I will get by. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God may know why. Still I will get by. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God may know why. Still I will get by. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God may know why. Still I will get by. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God may know why. Still I will get by. 'Cause you are my angel, my strength and my pride. Only God may know
You already, you know, man, already, man. Free band, ENT, man. You already know, man. We here from brother birthday, man. We turned up to the night, man. You see my mama in the wheel.
Hey, Jay. Happy birthday, Joy.
Hey, get me back. Tomorrow. Hey, you already know me.
Your Honor, just to conclude the state's presentation, no matter how you want to decipher or slice the verdict from the jury, what they made clear with their verdict is that they rejected any claim or defense of self-defense with their verdict. The confusion, I believe, was the fact that there were allegedly 3 weapons involved, and all 3 weapons were hidden and not recovered.
I mean, we know there were at least 3 weapons involved.
Yes. And what the jury made clear and what can be made clear through sentencing is that the actions of the defendants on that day were unjustified, inappropriate, and should not happen in our community, to be frank with Your Honor. So I don't want Your Honor or anyone to think that the state's recommendation is vindictive or excessive. The state made the recommendation that we've made because the actions of the defendants meet or equal the time, in the state's opinion, what they did that evening, Your Honor. Nothing further from the state.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan?
Your Honor, where do you want us?
Wherever
You
you'd
want
like
to
to be.
stay
I mean, it's complicated having you all there. If you'd like to be at the podium, you are audible wherever you are, so I'm not worried about you. It's other folks who might be speaking where we'll need to work through where they are.
Your Honor, first and foremost, on behalf of Mr. Blige, on behalf of his family, we are sorry for the loss of Solomon Smith. That is first and foremost. Your Honor, we appreciate the state's opinion of the jury's verdict, but the jury came back not guilty on both murder charges. So, Your Honor, in the event that this case would have been dropped down to an aggravated assault, it probably wouldn't have gone to trial. And then we would be in a different position with this case. Your Honor, a little bit about Mr. Blige, though. Mr. Blige is a young man who grew up in his mother's home. He did not have his father in his life until he was 15. His father is now active, and upon his graduation from high school, he immediately started working as a truck driver, and that was his life. He has really been a loner. He is a man that is in a truck for hours at a time alone, and even on the video when he's coming in and out, he's always alone. And I don't think, even the way that the video plays out, I don't think there's time for discussions in the midst of this situation. And I don't think, what I do think the evidence did show is that Mr. Blige is not aggressive and violent in nature and bad judgment calls. And we could have taken responsibility, and he did take responsibility for bad judgment calls. Your Honor, he has never been in trouble before. No juvenile record, no anything. He has never been in trouble before. This is the only time he has ever been in trouble. My client would like to make one last statement to yourself and to the people of the courtroom, and then I will make my recommendation.
Okay. So Mr. Blige, you should come on up to the podium if sheriff's folks are okay with that, and make sure you're talking to me. Your comments may be addressed to others, but it's important you're looking at me and not spinning around looking at other folks. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. First and foremost, just to the family, just words can't explain how sorry and that I feel, and my condolences go towards them, because this situation shouldn't nobody want to lose no family member, no child like that, especially a son, and to you, Judge, after today, you'll never see me again. I promise you that. And that's all I got to say.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blige.
Your Honor, it's short and to the point, and it's a sad room for everyone in this courtroom today. His family has been present, and we are thankful for that. He is first offender eligible. We are going to be asking for first offender. A total aggregate sentence we're asking for is a 20-5.
All right. And Ms. Fagan, is there anyone from Mr. Blige's family who wants to be heard, or you are their spokesperson?
And I think their presence has made the statement for the last week.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. King.
Thanks, Judge. Your Honor, I think that the best way to characterize this case is how Ms. Fagan started off by saying there's a series of events that led to this. And I definitely a series of bad decisions have led to this. I want to start by offering my condolences to the family. This is a tragic situation all around. I don't think anybody wants to discount that. And the fact that, you know, we have gone to trial with this case doesn't mean that there's not remorse. My client is extremely remorseful regarding what happened in this situation. I do think that it's important to acknowledge that the state said a couple of things that I beg to differ on. That it was clear that there were no threats. And you know, I'm not here to litigate and do another closing statement at all. But I mean, these arguments and brought up by the state, I think that the evidence doesn't support that. They made a decision. The prosecution made a decision in this case, and that decision was to get rid of certain people who had committed crimes. And the problem with those crimes are that was what led to the tragic demise of Solomon Smith. And you know, so I think that it's disingenuous to ask for the max and then ask for nothing for the people who actually put this thing in motion. And I think there's even a legal argument that there are other people that should have been charged with felony murder based on their aggravated assault. So I only say that because the state brings up this whole no threat thing, and that's, I guess, how we got to the actions of the two defendants in this courtroom. Secondly, regarding the concealing of evidence, there was no evidence that was presented that my client intentionally or unintentionally concealed anything, and that's an important fact. In this case, there was a lot of things that happened prior to my client getting involved, and the jury spoke. And what the jury said was, what you did was not acceptable. And we acknowledge that and we accept that. But the jury also acknowledged that my client did not cause the death of Solomon Smith. And so if the state is asking for the maximum, I don't see any other way to look at that besides that they're asking for homicide punishment for non-homicidal homicide behavior. And based on the facts of this case and not what the state believes or potentially might have happened, the way the facts were presented do not support a 25-year sentence for my client. He was not the aggressor. He did not, threaten anybody. He reacted. The jury said that he didn't react appropriately, but him not reacting appropriately doesn't turn it into he's the one who should be held responsible for the death. He should be held responsible for what the jury believed that he should be held responsible for based on that. He's not innocent in this situation. We acknowledge that. But I do want to tell you a couple of things about him. He has 3 young children under the age of 5. He has no adult record. He was a legal gun owner at this time. He was a full-time employed manager at a auto parts warehouse called IMC Parts Authority. He was involved in his family. He has never been accused any time of, in this case, of aggressing or being aggressive at all. And based on that, Judge, I believe that the appropriate thing, oh, and then lastly, Judge, we all saw the video. The person who we determined was Xavier Head was shooting into the ground. And not saying that bullets can't ricochet. I understand that. But the point to be made is that even when the threat was being posed, he wasn't shooting directly into a crowd. He was shooting into the ground. And that's what the evidence supported. That's what the video showed. So with those things being said, Judge, and I'm sensitive to the fact that there's loss of life. And that's why, there's no winners, there's no smiles. It doesn't, even if the jury would have acquitted my client, I would never smile about this or celebrate it, because a young Black man is dead. And so there's nothing to celebrate here. With that being said, I do believe that the appropriate result based on my client's conduct and the fact that the jury spoke is a 10 to 3 community time served, the balance on probation, Your Honor. And I do believe that, and I know he's eligible for first offender. I would ask that he be given that and whatever the sentence that this court gives. I've spoken to him. He does not wish to make a statement. He's extremely remorseful for his conduct. Wish he could take it back, but obviously that's not the case. And we're here. If there's a family member that wants to speak for Xavier Head, please come forward. But if not, just stand up. Family or friend. Thank y'all very much. And that's concludes my presentation, Judge. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to make sure I followed just that last part. You're recommending 10 served 3, reduced to time served, balance probated.
That's right.
First offender.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Situations like these are always difficult. No matter what I say in the next few minutes, no one will leave here happy. There will be some closure, I hope, for some, but the reality is that Mr. Blige and Mr. Head will go through that door back to the detention center, and they will be in custody for more time. And Mr. Smith's family will leave, and Solomon will not magically reappear on your arm as you walk out. It was a very powerful video, and you won't see him dancing in person. You'll have your memories, but there aren't incantations I can give that bring him back. So no one leaves here happy. And I think Mr. King was right. There's not a smile moment here. We are here because of a series of tragic circumstances and really, really ill-advised decisions made by young men who knew better. We are not dealing with a 16-year-old, or heck, we see 13-year-olds who are running around with guns, and they barely know which end the bullets come out of. And there are discussions to be had there of how could you hold someone like that responsible for what happened? Anyone who was in court for more than 20 minutes got to see the video. And you saw that there were some very intentional actions taken by a number of people. I think we probably saw 6, if we include Mr. Williams, people commit felony offenses. It starts with William Lewis. I think we saw more of William Lewis's criminal conduct than anyone else in this case. I don't know why he was able to walk away from all this. Maybe now there's a statute of limitations, but what he did to the woman he purportedly cared about and the other women in that parking lot was shocking. And yet there he was on the stand, not remembering any of it. We saw Helen Abraham commit an aggravated assault. She held a gun to someone's head. That was in some ways the single most dangerous thing that happened until people started pulling triggers. And then we had 3 young men firing guns in a crowded parking lot. That is never a good idea. It is something that results in tragedies like these. And I think if there is any silver lining to this, it's that only one person is dead. And that is not meant to suggest anything that should make the Smith family feel better, but it would not have surprised me if we were dealing with Mr. Smith's funeral as a result of this, and Ms. Abraham's funeral, or Ms. Cleat's funeral, who knows what. Unloading, I'm overstating it, but firing as many rounds as Mr. Head and Mr. Blige did in the direction of a dispersing melee, it is surprising that only one person was hit as a result of all that. I don't think anyone arrived at the Buckhead Lofts that night thinking they were going to pull out their gun, pull the trigger, kill anyone. None of this was intentional in that respect, premeditated in that respect. But I do think that it is very telling how long Mr. Blige was lurking by the side of his car, how he and Mr. Head, whether in concert or not, doesn't matter now. That was an argument for the jury. Walked slowly together up to the crowd of people, took a couple steps back, guns now up. I don't know about the shooting into the ground, but that's neither here nor there. You acknowledge the one person's gun who we know fired a bullet that hit Mr. Smith is the .38, and the evidence, I believe, shows that was Mr. Head's gun. Non-fatal shot, but that struck Mr. Smith nonetheless. There were very deliberate steps taken that resulted in those guns being fired. It happened in seconds, not minutes, but not a split second. It wasn't someone diving for cover and not looking and firing a shot to keep an approaching gunman off him. The only approaching gunman was Mr. Rivers, who was coming from a direction in which neither Mr. Head nor Mr. Blige fired. They fired into the crowd gathered around the car where Mr. Smith was hit, and Mr. Rivers was coming from the side of that situation. So I find in a very real way, Mr. Blige and Mr. Head were, we'll call them aggressors of the moment. They didn't start this situation. Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for doing that. Thank you, Ms. Abraham, for being the first person to produce a gun. But by the time the shots were fired, Ms. Abraham was out of the picture. That gun, and I don't know that Mr. Blige or Mr. Head had any idea that it was the same gun, but Ms. Abraham was out of the way and her gun was in Mr. Rivers's hand off to the side, not having yet been fired. And then the 2 men fire, and it's just not remarkable in the sense of a surprise. It's remarkable in the sense of the scope of the tragedy, but it's not remarkable in the sense of surprise. The Solomon Smith is dead. I don't think that's who you all were aiming at, but you weren't shooting in the air. You weren't shooting at your feet. You weren't intentionally shooting away from the crowd, hoping that the report of your guns would break up what was already breaking up. Aggravated assault is one of these statutes that gives a judge a huge range in which to sentence. It's 1 to 20 years. And when I first started out, I hated something like that because there are no anchor points. You know, there's some statutes where they create these gradations, and if it's more serious, the sentence needs to be higher. But with aggravated assault, it's 1 to 20. It can be probated. It would be a legal sentence to give Mr. Blige and Mr. Head a purely probated term. That's not what's going to happen, but that would be legal under the law. And so what I've come to understand, and what I've learned from judges who've done this longer and think about it more wisely, is that there are markers as to what happened, and that helps you figure out, well, is it 10 years? And how many of those 10 years within that range of 1 to 20 ought to be to serve versus probated? And I will tell you, Mr. Blige and Mr. Head, the most significant marker is, did the person you shot at survive? and Mr. Smith didn't survive. There is not a more serious aggravated assault than firing a gun. It's aggravated assault to wave a stick at someone. In the DA's office, I was there. We would bring those cases and they would get reduced to a misdemeanor and time served and people go. But this is at the opposite end of that spectrum. I don't think the disparate sentences that the state has recommended are appropriate. I suspect that the state would have recommended 35 years for Mr. Head. If there was another 10, they could pop in there, but they can't. It wasn't charged that way. I don't know that Mr. Head's and his extended family's efforts to make the 38 disappear are any more innocent than Mr. Blige's efforts to pick up the shell casings. And there's these allegations about a 9mm, and we're past the proof stage now, but it certainly would have been compelling evidence to bring that 9mm in and those shell casings to say, here's proof. I couldn't possibly have fired the 45 round that killed Mr. Smith, but that's neither here nor there. It was the gunfire precipitated by Mr. Blige and Mr. Head shooting their guns that resulted in Mr. Smith's death. And for that, they bear a great degree of responsibility. Mr. Blige, I'm going to sentence you on, get the counts right. Well, count one, it was a not guilty verdict, no sentence. Count two, not guilty verdict, no sentence. Count three, the aggravated assault, I am sentencing you to 20 years to serve. Count four is 5 years consecutive probated. Count five is 10 years to serve concurrent with count three. So it is a sentence of 25 years to serve 20 with a balance on probation. Mr. Head, your sentence is the same as Mr. Blige's. You just have slightly different counts. Count one is a not guilty verdict. Count two is a not guilty verdict. Count three is 20 years to serve. And count four is 5 years consecutive probated. Both of you will get credit for all the time that you've been in. These are parolable offenses. And while you may not feel like I mean it when I say it, I am a firm believer in second chances. You will both have many years of your life ahead of you when you are released from the custody of the Department of Corrections. And for that reason, I will sentence you both as first offenders. You need to understand the risks and benefit of first offender. So Mr. Blige, I've got a couple questions, things I need to say, and then questions for you. Do you understand, Mr. Blige, that if you are sentenced as a first offender, if while you are on probation or parole, because you are parole eligible, and the Board of Pardons and Parole will decide if and when you get parole. But while you are on parole and probation, if you violate your parole or probation, you could have your first offender status revoked, and I could resentence you up to the maximum, which, as you've heard, is 35 years. So right now it's 25 to do 20. And I'm making this up, but let's say 15 years from now, you're out and you get caught with a gun. You'd come back in front of me and I could, along with your new charges, resentence you in this case without a trial. There'd be a hearing, but if the state proved that you violated the law in whatever way that happened, I could resentence you and follow the state's recommendation of today and sentence you to the full 35 years. You get credit for all the time you had done, but you'd go back in to finish the rest of the 35. If you do fine on probation and parole, then this is something that you will never forget. It doesn't bring healing to the Smiths, but it does mean that if you're trying to plug back in with your family and, like I said, have that second chance in a way that Mr. Smith never will, you'll be able to do that. Do you understand the risks and the benefits of first offender?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to be sentenced as a first offender?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Head, did you ask for first offender as well? I think you did.
Yes, Judge.
Okay, Mr. Head, did you understand the things I just said to Mr. Blige?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to be sentenced as a first offender?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I will do that as well. Mr. Head and Mr. Blige, you both have a series of appellate rights that I am sure your lawyers have talked to you about, but I'm going to cover them anyway. First, you have the right to an appeal. That can happen in one of two ways. Your lawyers can file what we call a motion for new trial. They need to do that within 30 days. If they do that, then you can keep your lawyer who can represent you on appeal, but you have the right to counsel if you cannot afford an attorney. And your lawyer may actually tell you, you should fire me for now, because one of the things the appellate lawyer will do is assess whether I, Ms. Fagan, or I, Mr. King, made a mistake. That's one reason you get a new trial, if your lawyer made a significant enough mistake. But you'll have the right to counsel if you want a lawyer and you cannot afford one. You can skip the motion for new trial and have a direct appeal to the Court of Appeals, but you also can do both. And that's usually what your lawyers advise you. Hey, let's try this motion for new trial. If the judge denies it, we can still appeal to the Court of Appeals. Whatever it is you choose, you need to do that within 30 days of today. Your lawyer, Mr. King, Ms. Fagan, they will help you with that first step. But then, as I said, they may roll off because they may think it's wise for you to get a different lawyer for appeal. Do you understand that part of your appellate rights, Mr. Blige? Mr. Head?
Yes, sir.
You have an additional set of appellate rights for which you don't have a right to counsel. That's what we call a habeas challenge. That's when you bring a civil suit saying there was something wrong with your conviction or your sentence. And you have 4 years from the date your conviction is final. That means you've exhausted all your appeals or you've waived your appeals to file a habeas action. And you can hire an attorney for that, but you don't get one appointed for you. Do you understand your habeas timeline, Mr. Blige? Mr. Head?
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Abate, do you have anything else in connection with the Blige and Head case?
No, Your Honor.
Anything else you think we need to get in the record?
No, Your Honor.
You will advise Ms. Nelson what your intentions are with Quentin Williams.
Yes, Your Honor.
He's appearing on our next trial calendar, not meaning the one we've just talked about, but the next one to be published. He'll be on that just for your planning purposes.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. Mr. King, anything else on Mr. Head's case?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Ms. Fagan?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Your Honor, may I approach briefly?
I don't know, Deputy. What do we think? Yes, do you want to come back or you got to go? Okay. We will hear from you soon about Slayton. Is that the name?
Yes,
Okay,
working on it.
I'm sure you are. You're a busy man.
Surgery.
And thank the Smiths for that video. That was a
Thank you, Judge.
very impressive video.
Thank you, Judge.
Thanks.
The way I'm gonna move there.
He got you.
paying attention. So it's official. Correct. Heard they did, heard in front of you. They don't, they can, get to the Supreme Court.
But, so you can sign up and know it comes out. I texted it to you. It needs me to make it about 2 weeks.
How much time will be done? Everybody's got a right, about 10 years from now. Nice to meet you.
That's my oldest.
You guys all look the same.